Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Formula Shakedown podcast. I'm Henrico Marks, and with me once again today we have Peter Rodwell
Hi, good morning, everybody.
and Martin Weaver
Good evening, everyone.
and Steve Jackson.
Good morning.
All right, so since our last podcast, quite a bit has happened actually, both in F1 and outside. Just to get started with outside F1, well, still inside F1, but not the current championship. Netflix has released a new documentary, which I'm sure every F1 fan has seen by now. The Schumacher documentary. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was very well done. Very fitting tribute to the man himself. Very honest, very open. And I think it retained that privacy that the family is wanting with his current condition. So I'd like to open up the floor on that and just get a very quick opinion of your guys' views on that. Starting with Peter, what did you think?
Yeah, look, as soon as I was reminded that it came out, I put it on straight away on Wednesday. And look, I was quite moved by it, actually. It did remind me a lot of the Senna documentary that's come out many years before. And look, it was actually a great insight into Michael. Probably a lot of things we didn't know about him. We participated in karting under a different country's banner and that. I think the one thing that was only disappointing, and it's not really a big disappointment, is we only had 2 hours to really hear the story, and I'm sure there was so much more to tell and that we'd like to hear about, but alas, that's what we were allotted. But I would agree with you, Henrico. It was very well done. It was very moving, and obviously it provides us a lot more insight into such a great man.
And Martin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I also enjoyed the documentary. Growing up, I was a Villeneuve fan, so Schumacher wasn't my favorite driver, but I always respected him. And I feel like the documentary gave me an inside look of who Michael was as the person outside of a track and what he did when he wasn't racing. And I really appreciated that aspect of it and enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done, really respectful to his privacy and the family. And like Peter said, it's too bad it was only 2 hours long because I could have watched a lot more of it.
And then lastly, Steve, what's your take?
It was almost strange watching it because Michael was renowned for being an incredibly private person. So having some fairly personal moments expanded upon by his family and people he's worked with and that sort of thing. It was a bit strange. I wasn't a Villeneuve fan, but I was a Häkkinen fan. But similar to Martin. But he was that driver that you may not have been his biggest fan, but he was incredibly talented and quick. And it was, even though we were his current condition isn't, we don't really know what's going on, and we have no right to know, but I think it's a really lovely way of making sure his legacy remains alive regardless of what condition Michael himself is in. It keeps the memory and the legacy and the absolute on track monster that he was alive, because he was incredibly quick. And I think it's a shame that he can't tell us these stories himself, but the fact that these stories can be told at all is really, really, amazing. I loved it.
I think that's the general consensus. I think I don't see many F1 fans not enjoying it. If you haven't seen it, please do so. If you don't have a Netflix account, do what everyone else does and ask a friend, because it's worth the effort. It's worth the 2 hours. It was phenomenal, and I myself wasn't a massive Schumacher fan. I was a kid at the stage when he was racing. I knew who he was. I knew that he was the quickest on the grid. I was also a Häkkinen fan. I just liked the McLaren cars because they were prettier. But I don't think there existed a driver in recent memory that defined the sport quite like Michael did. And sure, we've got Hamilton now. We've got other drivers up and coming, and they are, striking their own path into the sport and making a name for themselves. And they will also go down as the greatest drivers to have ever graced the sport. But Michael was just kind of one of a kind as far as I'm concerned, because here we are, nearly 20 years since his last race in the Ferrari, and we're still talking about those days. So that's quite something. So very, very good watch. I would highly recommend, 10 out of 10. But then on to more current news. So we have seen the Dutch Grand Prix. It's the first one that we've seen since our last podcast, and what a Grand Prix it was. Very interesting track. It's kind of an old school feel that I don't think many people have come to expect and are used to in F1 these days. I enjoyed it. I suppose it could have been a bit processional, but that's going to happen when the track is so narrow and that. But I think it was overall a pretty good race. Peter, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, Martin or Henrico, I would agree with you. It was really, really good. Like I said, it was ultimately, I think it was good to have a new circuit into the fold. Historically over the years, obviously, pre Liberty coming into the sport, it was basically usually the same circuits every year. So it's great to have a lot of these new tracks coming on board. So that element of it was obviously really good. I mean, and of course the situation in the Netherlands right now, we saw these full crowds, and of course 99.8% of them I think were there to support their big man, Max Verstappen, and just to see that level of passion and support from their fans, it was basically a Dutch tifosi. So that added a lot to the weekend, and of course the weather was actually really, really good, and it was basically a second home race for Max. A lot of people tend to forget that he was born in Belgium, so Spa, before we had a Dutch Grand Prix, was his de facto home race. So to have those races back to back, even though we know what happened in Spa, it's obviously still great to see the traveling support, that he still had for both those races. So looking back now that the race has been run, look, there is a bit of a concern. I mean, we don't want these races turning into a bit of a parade. It needs a bit of it needs a bit of spice. So while the weather was nice, perhaps maybe a spot or two of rain would have helped spice things up a little bit. We didn't really have any safety cars, so there was nothing that really bunched the field back up together, and and may have created a bit of different outcome in that race. And then you mentioned Henrico. I mean, it's very much an old school circuit. I mean, I was actually quite surprised with the the levels of runoff, and track safety. It's not a very forgiving place. It's not like a lot of them, some of the other modern circuits which have got, the paved runoffs and things like that. The walls are quite close, a lot of the barriers. I believe one of the corners where they come into that stadium section, you've got that large gravel trap on the left, and if you got it wrong, you could easily come through that gravel trap and you're spewing up all the gravel onto the racing surface at the other end, which again does pose a bit of risk. But look, I think overall, no, it was a great race. Like I said, great to have a new circuit on. I think there's probably a bit more that we can, do to maybe fine tune it a little bit. But hopefully we get something that'll spice up the action and we don't have another, a bit of a processional race, as it were.
It's a very good point that you make there. It is an extremely unforgiving circuit. And yeah, I could see rain having an effect on it. Just hopefully in future, not to the extent of the Spa race. Martin, your opinions on the race in Holland, what did you think?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd like to say I wish I had the energy of Dutch fans, because it just seemed nonstop all weekend and it looked like a really fun time. As for the race, I don't think it was as exciting because there weren't as many overtaking opportunities throughout the race. But I think that's a dream scenario for Max, because he didn't make mistakes. He led the whole race and he ended up winning and essentially what all the fans there wanted. So it was kind of the happy ending for the fans. It was for them, it was worth the price of admission. One guy that did overtaking, the driver of the day, Sergio Perez, I kind of disagree with that driver of the day award, I guess, because he made mistakes in in the race, he flat spotted, and that really put him back. And in qualifying, he got stuck in traffic and didn't even make it out of Q1. So while he did look good passing all those weaker teams, he should be passing those weaker teams. And I think he was just making up for his mistakes. So I guess that's my take on the race.
It's a very insightful take, I would say. Yeah, we're going to get to Perez in a second, but onto your point about the fans, I think the way it panned out was very good having the fans there, but if the result had been any different, I think it might have been a lot less cheerful. For instance, if the crash that we had seen in Silverstone or in Monza had happened at Zandvoort, I don't think Hamilton would have walked away intact. I think some fans would have tried to get at him because that's the level of commitment that they have to their boy Max. So yeah, I think it was great to see the fans there, but I think it could have gone a lot worse had they not seen the result that they wanted. Steve, your impressions of the race at Zandvoort?
You echoed what I was thinking. I think if the result was anything other than what we saw, there would have been absolute scenes. But like Martin, you mentioned before, the energy and the amount of just effort into making their allegiance known in terms of the fans. I was lucky enough to go to Misano years and years ago for MotoGP, and it's the same thing with the Valentino Rossi fans. They're absolutely insane. You can't see, you can't breathe because it's just yellow, or in this case, orange smoke everywhere, and so on and so. It's insane. You can't hear anything because they're making that much noise. It's an exciting track. I don't think it particularly suits this current spec of car. I know I've banged on about it in a couple of previous episodes, but we can really only hope that the 2022 Aero regulations make things a wee bit spicier. So I don't think it was the world's most exciting race, but I think if you were there, it would be far more. You'd probably be far more invested in the race. It's very rare that you're sitting that close to a circuit nowadays. With a lot of circuits, like Monaco would probably be the exception, but good luck getting tickets. But with the majority of circuits nowadays, you're 13 miles away from the circuit itself. It's very hard to sort of get engaged when you're sitting that far away. So for you to be right up close with these cars, with how quickly they sort of appear and then disappear in your field of view, would be massively exciting. But as a spectacle and as a one lap sort of absolute on the limit onboard camera sort of thing, it's a really, really exciting track. Bring back to corners, but just not Michelin, because we know what happens when you combine the two.
Let's not get into that. But onto the banked corners, I think that's something that everyone was excited about and everyone wanted to see. And they definitely did make for some interesting overtakes and interesting angles on the race, especially the racing lines that we used. I think one of the best drivers to do that was Fernando Alonso, to kind of nail where the overtaking spots on the corners and the apexes lie to get the most speed. So, Peter, do you think that more circuits should have this kind of banking? Would it add to the racing, or is it just like a novelty that Zandvoort has?
Yeah, well, look, if we look at the history of Formula One, banked circuits are actually nothing new. So for those that actually watched the Italian Grand Prix, last week, if you look closely in the coverage, you can actually see the remnants of a banked circuit. And that banked circuit, of course, was used for a period of time. wasn't the safest, quite bumpy as well. And then, of course, Indianapolis, and we've kind of flirted with with Michelin and tire debacles at Indianapolis back in 2005. But then, of course, we've got the original Nürburgring circuit, which has the old carousel corner, which of course is banked. I believe there's another smaller version of the carousel on the track as well. So look, the idea of having these banked turns is really nothing new. I think just the fact that we've reintroduced them into the sport, look, it does add a bit of novelty, but it's also a spectacle as well for us, the fans, watching on watching on TV, carrying, different speeds through, through these corners and that. But naturally, there is a danger element that does, come out of it. I mean, we do look at in yesteryear, like with Monza, where you'd see cars, shooting off the banking. If you've ever watched the movie Grand Prix from 1966, you could see where that had come into play. Of course, nowadays the circuits are designed with safety in mind. We're seeing, at some of the NASCAR ovals in the USA, with these safer barriers than that. These same barriers are being employed at Zandvoort, on the banked, corners they've got there as well. So look, I think the keys to keeping them being successful going forward is obviously keep an eye on the tire wear. I mean, obviously it seemed to be that Pirelli were prepared for the banked corners. They've obviously brought tires to that event. They were able to cope with that. So that was really a non-issue, but we still want to promote good and safe racing. And of course, when I say safe, I mean, I don't want to overly sanitize it where it does turn into a procession. It would be great if actually they had, 2 grooves around those banked corners, but obviously we still want to make sure that drivers are doing that, safely. So we're still getting, that spectacle out of it, but at the same time, we want it promoting, good racing as well.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah, it was awesome to see. I enjoyed it very, very much. And everyone watching with me did as well, because it's something that you don't see anymore, these flat, massively aerodynamic cars going in such a steep gradient. But it made for some beautiful shots on camera, so that was good. Then one of the talking points of the race, something a bit controversial, was Valtteri, this is James. Please abort the fastest lap. I think a lot of people were displeased with that. I can see why Mercedes made that call. But Martin, what do you think? Do you think it was the right call for them to request Bottas to abort the lap and indeed to bring Bottas in for a pit stop? He is the de facto second driver. So do you think that was fair on their part to request that of him?
In terms of team sport, that Formula One can be with the 2 drivers, I guess I would call it fair because that was a team decision. For the team's perspective, it was fair. I guess Valtteri was a little, it seems, maybe frustrated through his years of Mercedes of being told, let Hamilton through or abort the fastest lap. It was an interesting moment because I think he was told more than once to abort the lap, and he put in the fastest first sector and the fastest second sector. And I think it made a few people nervous at Mercedes, but eventually he did abort the lap. I think in that moment he knew what his faith was with the team. And I don't know if he was contemplating doing it or just trying to send a message in doing it. So it was an interesting moment in the race. Fair. I guess from the team, like I said, yes. For Valtteri, maybe it's a little unfair, but that's just a sport.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Things like this can kind of spiral out of control. If we look back to the Barrichello-Schumacher incident back in the day, team orders are always difficult because on the one hand, you want to do what's best for the team. On the other hand, you want your drivers to achieve their full potential. So somewhere, something's got to be sacrificed. And I don't think you're ever going to satisfy everyone. So I personally wasn't a huge fan of the decision. I think they should have been allowed to race, but I do understand why they did it. That extra point for Lewis can mean, the difference in him getting the Drivers' Championship or not getting it. I think championships have been won by a point more than once in the past. So, yeah, I can see the reasoning behind that. And then onto the championship fight itself, Red Bull, Mercedes currently ahead. And I think this was spoken about earlier in the year on our mod group, and Martin touched on it earlier. The role that the second drivers are playing. Obviously, Bottas is now doing it extremely well. But Perez, unfortunately for Red Bull, just doesn't seem to be getting in there as much as he should. Yes, he was driver of the day at the Dutch Grand Prix. Some say he would deserve it, some say he wouldn't. But Steve, do you think that he played his role right, or do you think that he needs to come to the party a bit more now?
he shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. I mean, if we remove the engine swap scenario from the equation, he he didn't get out of Q1. They obviously took the engine penalty there and then because it just made sense. I mean, you make lemonade from lemons that you've got. But no, by rights he shouldn't have been there. He's been hired as regardless of what he and Red Bull say, it's very obvious he's been hired as the supporting act to back Max up for the championship, and that's a vital role. I don't think everyone necessarily appreciates just how important that second driver is. I mean, would Michael Schumacher have been, 4 times world champion at Ferrari without Rubens Barrichello? Would Lewis Hamilton have as many, World Drivers' Championships if he didn't have Valtteri backing him up, 75% of the time? The fact that he's just not where he needs to be really does highlight 2 things for me. One is that car is horrendously difficult to drive, and they've obviously built it around a very specific driving style. And just apologies for referencing it again, but it's the same as what's happened with Repsol Honda in MotoGP with Marc Marquez. He was away for a very, very long time, and the bike's nowhere. So you could imagine what would happen with that team if Max got lured to another manufacturer with a lucrative offer or whatever it might be. Like where would they end up? I mean, it's they've very much put all their eggs in one basket. But where that doesn't help Checo is the fact that it's just not a good look. And I can't imagine all of it is down to the car. I mean, he's got to be flexible enough to adapt to a different car. It's something that Daniel struggled with at McLaren for most of the year until very recently. And it's one of those things where, adaptability is something that they do need to sort of take into consideration. But we're over halfway through the season. Red Bull are trailing in the Constructors' Championship. And there's 5 points in the Drivers' Championship at the moment or something. So it's the thinnest of margins. And that sort of really does highlight the fact that he does need to be up there with Max, backing him up, taking advantage of those, like what he did in Baku, like taking advantage of, a bad situation and making sure that he brings it home for the team and gets them the best possible result. That was exactly what he needs to do. But that was an incredible high for him. But vast majority of the time, it's been, fairly incredible lows, and it's really sad. I like that they've invested in him for 2022, but I don't like the fact that we all know that Red Bull contracts do have a clause in there that say we can basically get rid of you at any time, and they have done that numerous times in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled another stunt like that next year if this carries on.
You're right. It is quite sad because I think Checo is a very underrated driver. He showed his mettle last year in that Racing Point. He's extremely good at what he does. If you give him a half decent car, he can really pull it off. But I think you hit the nail on the head that Red Bull is insanely tricky to drive. It's if you can hit the sweet spot and you can drive it well, it's arguably the best car on the grid. But getting to that point is extremely, extremely difficult because I think it's very twitchy. I think it's on the edge the whole time. And to keep that under control takes quite an amount of practice and, honing your skills to do that. And Max has had the time to do it. And I think it's showing now because there have been quality drivers coming through that team. Pierre Gasly is by no means a bad driver. Alex Albon is by no means a bad driver. Sergio Perez is by no means a bad driver. And all of them have struggled with a car that's supposed to be the quickest. So I think something has to happen for them to either ease the pressure on the second driver or try and make the car a bit easier to drive or just give them more time to develop. But with the current management structure at Red Bull with Dr. Marco basically pulling the strings, I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think it's going to take a toll on the second drivers for quite some time, which is unfortunate because I think with Checo being there in the top 3 in most races, Red Bull would more than likely be ahead right now. because it is a brilliant car. But as brilliant as it is, we saw at the Italian Grand Prix something that I think everyone expected from the beginning. It just doesn't have the outright straight line speed that the Mercedes does. If you look at those two next to each other on a long straight, that Mercedes just pulls ahead. That power unit is incredible. I don't know. It's quite something to behold. So, Peter, what was your take on the power difference between Mercedes and Red Bull at Monza for the Italian Grand Prix?
Well, look, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Mercedes obviously did have the upper hand. I mean, we look at McLaren; they had they've had a 1-2 with McLaren engines in the back. We had Valtteri starting way at the back. Now, of course, he's driving quite an amazing car as well, but he's that Mercedes power brought him all the way back up to the front again. Aston seemed to be the only Mercedes engined cars that really didn't do that well. Even Williams, like I said, George Russell was able to get into the points, into ninth. Look, it's actually tricky though, with Monza, because it's very much an aero circuit. I mean, we look at the wings that that Red Bull were running. It was probably a bit more excessive than Mercedes was, because they were just trying to find maybe where they felt they had the engine power gap. They could try and make that up with with running such limited or having no aero at all, and just trying to rely on a slipstream. I mean, we've seen that in qualifying. I mean, and we've seen this in every Monza race. It's just because you're full throttle for 85% of that lap. It's just trying to find those toes where you can. So even if you don't necessarily have the engine power, if you just able to hook up with the right train, sort of speak, you can make up some there. But we obviously saw that Red Bull just simply didn't really have the pace to keep up with Mercedes on the day.
And you alluded there to Valtteri Bottas, his performance throughout the race. That impressed me massively. I was expecting him to hit the top 10, but not a podium. So, Martin, what do you think about Bottas's performance coming through from last place and managing to get onto the podium?
Yeah, well, Bottas was good the whole weekend. It was almost like he was a new driver. That came after the announcement to Alpha. Maybe there wasn't any pressure. Maybe he didn't have to keep that secret anymore. So he looked very focused and very fast all weekend. It's unfortunate he got the engine penalty to start in the back, because he could have won that race. And I think that by far this was his best race of the year, because there are certain races this year, Imola, where he crashed with George, he shouldn't even been racing at Williams, and other results, he wasn't really himself this year. But this was the race where I've seen him as good as he's ever been. And he didn't win, but that's because he started at the back. But I think he was really good all weekend.
I honestly agree with you there that I think it is the fact that there's not so much pressure. He doesn't need to, prove his worth anymore, because his contract with Mercedes is over. I think he's just going out there and he's enjoying it, and you can see that he's enjoying it in the interviews. He just looks a lot more lighthearted. He looks like it's more fun for him, and the results speak for themselves. He was miles ahead. He was doing really, really well. I was very pleased to see that, because I think he deserves a bit of a break. He gets a lot of flack for not competing with Lewis, but is it really such a bad thing to not be able to beat a 7-time world champion? I mean, Lewis is a damn good driver, but I think Valtteri is in his own right. So yeah, it was a outstanding performance from him as far as I'm concerned. And onto another outstanding performance. It's the Verstappen and Hamilton crash. Not something I wanted to see, not something I think most people wanted to see, but everyone knew it was coming. And I think most people knew it was going to happen into that turn at some point or another during the weekend. So, Steve, do you think that it was inevitable? Do you think that it was a long time coming? What's your take on that Hamilton-Verstappen crash?
I said after Silverstone that won't be the last one, and I wasn't wrong, and I'm definitely not the only person who thought that. I think a lot of it just comes down to pure desperation from both sides. It's normally by this stage of the championship, we've got a fairly good idea of who's going to end up where, and in terms of the top step, and it's usually Lewis. I just don't think either Lewis or Max have obviously been in this position before, where it's a title fight between two different teams. I mean, the Rosberg thing was a little bit different, just purely because they, at the end of the day, have to share the same garage. They have to report to the same management. They're in the same team. It's a slightly different dynamic, but this is the first inter-team championship battle we've had for years. Since 2013, to be honest. Ferrari have had a couple of goes at it, in the V6 turbo hybrid era, but really they've always come up short, quite obviously. In terms of the crash itself, I might cop flack for this. I do apologise if this is something you disagree with wholeheartedly and feel very passionate about. To me, that was a racing incident. I understand that the stewards have to, they don't have to apportion blame, but they do have to look at it from a constructive perspective and consider the accident without taking into consideration the merits or the consequences or the aftermath or whatever. So to that extent, I understand that they have to apply a penalty. But it's the same reason why I am now a little bit funny about the Silverstone penalty for Lewis. I don't like. There's no question in my mind that they were both accidents. There was nothing intentional about either one. I think it's just two drivers who are incredibly hungry for this title. It's Mercedes trying to clean sweep the whole, this initial generation of these cars, and it's Red Bull trying to stop them from doing that. That's motivation enough to get desperate. And they've both done some rather stupid things on track this year. I mean, you look at Lewis at Baku with the magic button, just that's a small oversight with a massive consequence. Lewis at Imola, small oversights with massive consequences. He still did well. And it's just it's a really, really tricky thing to analyze as a fan, because at the end of the day, I'm sitting at home on my couch. I don't have access to data or anything like that. I've got F1 TV Pro, so I can look at onboards and live timing and splits and deltas and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, they are the drivers. They will do what they feel is right in the heat of the moment to get the job done. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people need to take into consideration, is these things happen in no time at all. You look at Cops is so fast. That's an incredibly quick corner. I do not blame Lewis for putting his nose up the inside of Max and giving it a go, even though it was very likely he wasn't going to make it. I don't blame Max for having a go into Monza T1, even though that was probably going to end in tears as well. The thing I'm grateful for is that in both instances, everyone walked away. That's the thing for me. And I know that's the safe answer, but I just don't like seeing anyone get hurt. I wouldn't wish that even upon Mazepin, even though I just genuinely do not like the guy. I would not wish that upon him or anyone, because at the end of the day, this is an incredibly high-pressure sport. These things happen. And if this were the same accident, but it was between, say, Vettel and Alonso, actually, can you imagine that if it was between those two? But if it was between Vettel and Alonso, or, Ocon and Checo or whoever, the wailing and gnashing of teeth on social media would not be nearly as bad as it is currently. But it's just because it happened between those two that we've got some fairly awful stuff happening on social media. And if you are one of those people who feels the need to celebrate drivers potentially getting hurt or that sort of thing, consider whether you're a fan or not, because I would say you aren't, but that's another story.
Absolutely. I also tend to consider it a racing incident. Look, I'm a bigger Verstappen fan than I am a Hamilton fan. And I do think that Probably Verstappen was slightly more at fault than Hamilton, but I don't think Hamilton was blameless. I think, as you said, it's just two drivers who desperately want to get ahead. I think Max was annoyed about his pit stop that was too long, and he saw an opportunity to mitigate that disaster. I think Hamilton saw it as an opportunity to get ahead in the driver's standings and didn't want to give an inch, and what happened happened. I don't think the grid penalty is extremely unfair in the same way that I don't think, as you said, Hamilton's penalty at Silverstone, if it's good for one driver, it's good for another. Obviously, they can't give Max a 10-second penalty if he's out of the race, so they give him a grid drop for the next race. Personally, I think what Red Bull's going to do is give him his new engine for the next race. That would probably mitigate any sort of penalty, but I don't know. I don't know what their strategy department is looking at, but that's the way I see it playing out.
That would make sense,
yeah. On to happier news, though. The first McLaren 1-2 since I can't even remember. They weren't orange when the last time that happened. I think it was Jensen and Lewis, 2012, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think it was Canada. So, I think they had said. I can't remember.
Yeah, Canada's 2012.
I think it was 2012, but regardless, it was what a great sight to see McLaren boys up there, and I mean, Ricciardo especially. He's had a tough season. That McLaren also doesn't seem to be the easiest car to drive, especially coming from Renault-based units, which he has been for the past while. So I think it's really awesome to see. Peter, standout moments from the McLaren 1-2 for you?
I think just the way that Daniel just took hold of that race right from the start and never looked back. So I think right for me, as soon as Ricciardo had that lead, he never looked back. That was the standout for me.
For sure. Martin?
Yes, by the way, Canada 2012, it was Lewis and Grosjean 1-2. I think I remember them saying 2009 was the last one too. But it was actually really nice to see this. What was even more amazing is that even if Lewis and Max were still in the race, it might have still been 1-2. So they definitely won that on merit. It was years in the making. I read something today on the week that Zach Brown took over. Alonso qualified 13th and Van Dorn qualified 18th. And in the race, Alonso got a DNF and Van Dorn finished 13th. So they've come a long way since then. I think Zach Brown and I think the whole team's doing a really good job. And it was actually genuinely really great to see them back up there.
Absolutely. Steve, standout moment from the McLaren result?
It's two, but they're really quick. One was Lando's face doing a shoey. Immediately afterwards, just looked disgusted with himself. It was amazing. The thing that made it for me, Peter and Martin, you've both made just the whole thing was for me amazing. But if you listen to Daniel's onboard, once he's on the cooldown lap, you can hear Zach Brown absolutely losing the plot in the back. Like he's absolutely chuffed, and that's what makes it for me. This is a guy who came into McLaren in
2016 executive director.
Wow. Yes, yeah. Sorry, I'm way off. So 2016, and he got a lot of flack. Like it was typical. Here comes an American into Formula One. This can only end badly, and so on and so forth. And look what he's done. This is a team sport, but at the end of the day, the team is only as good as the person leading it, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's taken the team by the scruff of their neck, taken them from, let's be honest, a bit of a running joke. Those McLaren Honda hats, I've got one somewhere, and I dare not look at it. But he's taken it from nothing to a team that not only won at Monza, not only was it a 1-2, but it was, like, as Peter pointed out, they were fully in control the entire time. There was no doubt or question marks over whether they'd A, make the finish, or B, whether Bottas would get past them or not. there was just no element of uncertainty there, and that's what made it for me. But hearing just how proud and happy Zach Brown was just shows just how much that means to that whole team, because that I reckon they're still buzzing. I don't think that'll be a sensation that'll disappear for weeks.
I think Ron Dennis will be proud as well.
Yeah. In fact, actually, I don't know if he's on social media or not, but I'd love to hear his thoughts on it, because I think he would be absolutely chuffed.
I think my standout moment was Lando. Look, Lando could have been very sour about the whole situation, because at one point he was faster than Daniel. And he probably, if he had been allowed to race him, probably would have passed him and taken that win himself, and it would have been his first one. I think it would have meant a lot to him. But what stood out to me was his level of maturity in saying, if this is best for the team, I'll stay behind him. Just tell him to hurry up. That was quite something. It's not often that you get a driver in that position, especially someone as young as Lando, willing to do that. Not to say that Ricciardo didn't deserve the victory. He completely did. But I do think there was a point where Lando's tires were in better condition. He had a bit more pace. He could have probably passed Ricciardo, but could have risked jeopardizing the race and ending up like Hamilton, Verstappen, in a barrier or in the gravel or in the walls somewhere. And I think that level of maturity to say, okay, you know what, I'll stay where I am. This is a good result. And I think he was genuinely happy for Daniel after the race, which speaks volumes to how he's maturing as a driver. And that just stood out to me. All right. So that's the Italian Grand Prix done and dusted. Next up, driver movements. I think silly season's finally drawing to a close. There's just one seat left. But let's start to what we do know. Russell to Mercedes. I don't think anyone saw this coming. It was a massive shock to me to hear it announced. So, Peter, do you think he's actually going to challenge Lewis Hamilton, or do you think he's going to just revert to a number 2 and kind of support and just, let Lewis take the victories that he should and give him the support where he needs it?
Oh, look, I think being completely honest here, like I said, Russell will be a challenger right from the start. But you have to remember, George is very much gentleman George, so it's going to be very, very subtle. So, George coming into the team, I think obviously, public face is going to be, I know I've got the car to go do this and I want to go do this. But that's obviously not the the message or image I want to portray. So I think very much, he knows that Lewis is going to be probably viewed as the number 1 right now without really mentioning that. But George is not, he'll be fully aware that, Lewis is going to be retiring, I think, very soon. Certainly within the next 2 seasons, I think. So George is very much primed to, to be considered that, de facto number 1 driver. So I think there is going to be an element where I think George will want to come in and he'll still want to learn and absorb as much as he can from Lewis. I'm sure he's been doing this already, but I think now that they're going to be teammates, he'll be wanting to look for, for every opportunity to, to go do that. And that way that's going to set himself up for that level of success. So there's no doubting that. He's already the de facto number 1 at Williams, I think, as it is. So he's already got that psyche, embedded in him already. So I think he'll just take that coming into Mercedes. It's going to take a few races, I think, into 2022 just to see what things are going to look like and how this is going to work. But I think it's obviously there's a great deal of excitement about this because we're kind of renewing those team battles that we've seen in the past. I mean, we've seen Lewis and Nico, most recently. We go back a few years to McLaren. We had we had Hamilton and Alonso, which of course didn't end very well. And we go back even Prost and Senna. Over the years, we've seen that, and then even Villeneuve and Pironi at Ferrari. So I think it's really great to see these team battles. We've been talking about, obviously it's great having the battles on track between the different teams and manufacturers, but it's actually still good to see that we'll see the inter-team rivalry come back and true again with Russell and Hamilton again.
And then next up we have Valtteri Bottas. I'm glad he's staying on the grid, going to Alfa Romeo next year. Martin, do you think they can make it work? Do you think they'll be able to break into the midfield, or do you think they're just going to stay where they are, more or less to the back of the grid, getting the odd point here and there?
Yeah, Bottas, he's a really good driver. He's steady. I think Bottas is probably the best driver a team like Alpha could get. It might sound a little harsh, but they're just not really a good team. I view them as the 9th team on the grid. I feel like Williams is ahead of them. He'll get decent results for that team. He'll probably get better results than the team's getting now, because he'll push that car and really, get everything out of it. I can't see him getting anything from 5th upwards. He might, get a few races where he's 8th, 9th, 10th. Having that experience on that team might help the team overall, but I can't see them really making a jump over Williams. Williams' progress is just really impressive. I don't see them passing Aston Martin either. So I guess the answer to that is no. But I still think they'll be a better team than Haas.
Okay, that one, yeah, I think that's kind of a given. But who knows? Maybe us. Maybe Mazepin's next World Drivers' Champion. We never know. But speaking of Williams, next year we've got a new face there, Alex Albon. Got a tough job ahead of him, because I think that's been George Russell's job over the last 3 seasons with Williams, building up the team, developing the car, improving. And I think him and Nicholas Latifi and the people working behind the scenes have really, really done that, especially this year. So for Albon to step into that, I think that's a decent amount of pressure. So Steve, do you think he's going to succeed? Do you think he's going to do well at Williams, or do you think that pressure of building the team and continuing to develop is going to get to him at some point?
I think the foundation, or the sort of environment of the team has changed massively since Dalton took over and Jos Capito has come on board, and the Williams family has sort of stepped aside. I mean, one thing that I am just constantly remembering, because I'm a massive Alex Albon fan, I think it was just criminal how he was just sort of treated and then cast aside with Red Bull, but it's again another story. I don't think they gave him any opportunity to actually show his worth and let him develop, which is what we hit on earlier with Red Bull, just as in general. So I think now that the groundwork's been done in terms of getting Williams re-established as a well-funded and well-oiled machine, and he's got an opportunity there to take the work that they've done so far and that George has put in so far and run with it. I mean, again, here's me banging on about 2022 again. We've got entirely new cars coming in terms of the aerodynamic and chassis side of things. I mean, the power unit's staying the same, but the Mercedes power unit is by far and away the most powerful power unit on the grid. So there's no real question marks over that. It's more just whether Williams can take advantage of this rule change and actually move upward, because I think if they do, I think both their drivers are perfectly capable of doing so. I mean, I do rate Nick Latifi. He was slow to sort of get his head into it, basically. Like he made quite a number of mistakes in his first season, but I'm glad they've kept him. There's good continuity with the team. I'd expect him to maybe take over that de facto team leader role, because he's just been, settled in the team longer. And Albon can, go into a well-structured team with, some really solid, foundations in place, and hopefully make the most of it. The interesting thing is to me anyway, is this Red Bull contract thing that he's under, and I do wonder if Red Bull, I do wonder if Red Bull have done this intentionally just to play some games with Mercedes and annoy Toto a wee bit. But I do wonder if they are going to start, obviously sponsoring Albon, but by default, technically funding Williams with some personal sponsorship money as well, because that would be an interesting dynamic to introduce into that team as well. It's like, hey, one of the competitors who is at your power unit supplier's throat at the moment, here's a couple of million to sort of sweeten the deal. So I think there's a few moving components there that we don't know everything about, and we possibly never will, because F1 contracts are very, very secretive. But the fact that he's going back to a team that is not the team it was even 2 seasons ago is very, very promising. I have full confidence in him to do well, because it's not that Red Bull environment. It's, Williams are a very sort of, you can tell they care about both their drivers. I've never got the impression that they heavily favour one over the other, and I think that will work in his favour. I think he'll be far more relaxed, and I hope he's just happy to be back in the sport, because I certainly am.
Likewise, I think he's going to do well there, because he is an extremely good driver. But onto the Red Bull contract thing, I have a very, very, very conspiracy-ish theory about it. I'm just going to quickly gloss over it. See, Williams has a deal with Mercedes until, 2025 for their engines? And then new regs come in. Jos Capito was involved with VW, and there are talks that VW might be entering alongside Red Bull. So possibly, my brain is telling me that possibly that tie is going to be there so that Red Bull, Williams, AlphaTauri get VW Red Bull powertrains. But that's just a very offhand prediction. It might come true, it might not. It'd be interesting to see.
That's not conspiracy theorist at all. I quite like that. That makes sense. Like there's seeds planted in every bed of the garden. I like it. That works well.
It would be interesting to see. I'm just super stoked at the prospect of another manufacturer coming in. I think it could be cool. All right, and then on to the last available seats in Formula One at the moment, at Alfa Romeo, the second seat, and there are a number of options. We've got, obviously, Antonio Giovinazzi retaining the seat. Then there have been talks about Nick de Vries. There have been talks about Mick Schumacher moving from Haas, although I don't know if that's going to happen. There have been talks about Eilert, there have been talks about Schwartzman, and there have been talks about Guan Yu Zhou. So, Peter, what's your prediction? Who do you think's getting that seat and why?
Yeah. Look, this has been a real interesting one. Like I said, and we've talked about, obviously with the Albon situation, at Williams, there could be a lot of interesting things at play here. So right now, I think Guan Yu Zhou is probably got to be one of the front runners. Sad to say, it would probably be simply because of the money. That being said, I don't know where kind of Sauber and Alpha sit on, are they really that dependent on bringing that funding in? They are obviously one of the smaller teams on the grid, and as Martin's alluded to, they're probably, going to have a hard time kind of coming off near the bottom. So maybe that funding might, help with, with development, and so you'd go with Joe. We did mention, Nick de Vries, obviously he's Formula E champion, has strong ties with Mercedes. There has been a lot of talk recently about, potentially Sauber, Alpha switching to Mercedes power. Whether that comes to fruition or not, that's probably a bit too early to tell. But look, there's probably a lot of discussions that are going on that, again, we're just not, we're not privy to. I've kind of, as a real outside shot, I mean, I've put Nico Hulkenberg's name in there, but look, I think as much as I would love to see the Hulk back in the sport, I just don't know what options are going to be open to him to come back in. And I've put in, our local up and comer. We've got Oscar Piastri, who's doing a phenomenal job of giving a great title run to Guan Yu Zhou down in F2. But the problem is that he just doesn't have the funding right now that that some of these other smaller teams would probably desire to bring in. So very much an outside chance there. So look, a lot of it, I think it's just going to have to come to to the funding, I think, at the end of the day, and just where if money is ultimately going to talk in making this decision.
Martin, who do you think's got the seat and why?
Yeah, Oscar Piastri is the driver that has done everything he's needed to do to get a seat in F1. But for fans of Oscar Piastri, and that includes myself too, I apologize for this next part because I feel like the driver that makes the most sense in that seat is Guan Yu Zhou. And the reason being, Piastri is an Alpine Academy driver. He's not a Sauber Academy driver or anything. And the funding. Alpha doesn't need a driver that can win them races because they're never going to be in that position right now. They need money. They need development. And Guan Yu Zhou has been tied with 30 million euros of sponsorship, which is a good amount of money to bring to a team. He's also a guy who's steady. He's a decent driver. He's putting up a good fight against Piastri in the championship. He's always there. He's just not as consistent as Piastri. I think that makes the most sense. He would be a driver like Latifi, I think. Been in Formula 2 for a few years. Decent results. He's second in the standings. He might finish in second, like Latifi, behind a really good driver. And he'll go into Formula 1, and he'll be steady. He'll finish the race. He'll beat the cars that he needs to be. He's actually had a practice session this year in Hungary, I believe. Hungary or Austria, I forget, but he did decent. I think he was P16 in that practice session. Here's another big advantage for Alpha why they would go with Zhou. And I already mentioned the money, but Guan Yu Zhou would become the first Chinese driver in F1. We've seen the Chinese Grand Prix sort of gain popularity. It would mean a lot to Alpha to have all those Chinese fans, this new market, where Alfa Romeo caps, and support that team. It would really bring a boost to that team. And it's interesting because I was reading an article on Guan Yu Zhou this week, and he said that, already he has people contacting him, telling him, look, I look up to you. You're the guy, in China who I'm a race fan, and I want to be just like you. So I guess we're always seeing that. So like I mentioned, the driver is doing everything he can to get the seat, Piastri. But I think the front runner is Guan Yu Zhou, and that would bring a lot of benefits to the team itself.
Steve, who do you think's got the seat and why?
Yuji Ide. No, I'm kidding. Olivier Panis. No. Imagine that if Yuji Ide got a super license again. I suppose the romantic solution for me would be Mick Schumacher, just to get him out of Haas and get him into a team that was actually going to nurture him. Because I just can't see that happening at Haas, especially if the still yet to go away rumours of Mazepin Senior buying out the team basically don't go away. Realistically, though, I think it's Zhou. There's a few reasons there. Martin's hit on pretty much the what I was going to mention, but another thing that's worth remembering is Fiat Chrysler had a go at the Chinese market way back. What was it, 2009? And then I think they basically called it a day around 2016, 2017, just because the sales numbers were just terrible. So they stopped the importation of cars into China under the Alfa Romeo and Maserati brands. That was apparently a bit of a sore point for Fiat Chrysler Group, because they, like any sort of market with sort of economic liquidity and wealth that China has is a market that any car manufacturer worth their name would want to get into. So having a Chinese driver under the name of a brand who have tried and failed to get into Alfa Romeo in the past may rejuvenate that market and get interest in them again. So there are a few elements to them. There are some political ones, as Martin said. He's I can't remember the name of the company, but it's basically a metallurgy or like heavy metals production company in China who have invested a lot of money in Guan Yu Zhou, and he's got some other sponsorship as well. So it's a bit of a no-brainer to me. Performance-wise, he's really good as well. It was Austria, I think, that he did his FP1 appearance in as well, and did very, very well. So there's not really any modicum of risk in taking him on. I mean, they've got Valtteri Bottas, who's, you know, a proven talent. Like, we don't really need to sell him. He's already sold himself. But Guan Yu Zhou is a capable driver. I think he could actually do very, very well in a team led by Valtteri Bottas, just to guide him and, you know, help him develop as a driver. And for Alfa Romeo and Sauber, it's a win-win for them. It could potentially open up a failed, private vehicle market that they've attempted to tap into in the past, and it gives Sauber the money that they need to actually develop a car beyond making a front wing sit even lower and lower to the ground that it did the year before, because that's apparently all they've been doing to their car for the last few years. But I think Guan Yu Zhou is the sensible choice. My pick would be Mick Schumacher or Taki Inui.
Personally, I'd pick Robert Schwartzman just because I like him, but I don't see that happening. But yeah, I'm going to concur. Guan Yu Zhou is probably the most sensible choice. I like him too. He's a very good driver. He delivers. He's one of the few paid drivers who, okay, well, not few, but he is a paid driver that, unlike some others, can actually drive really well. So yeah, it's definitely a win-win. All right, at this point, I'd like to hand over to Martin to discuss our feeder series, F2, F3, etc. So take it away, Martin. As everyone knows, I have yet to gain sufficient knowledge about this. I'm going to get there, I promise.
Yeah, it's actually an exciting weekend in Sochi because we have F1, we have F2, and we have F3, which isn't really part of the format, but they canceled the US Austin race for F3, which would have been the season finale, and they moved it to Sochi. So now we get action from all three of the series. You have Hauger leading with 43 points. He's been good all season except for Spa, but that came down to qualifying. With 43 points, a total points in a weekend that you can get is 65. And of course, if you qualify first, you have to start in 10th. And then if you win the next race, you have to start in 10th again. So it's very unlikely any driver could get 65 points. I think the championship is pretty much won at this point, but it's not over till it's over, of course. Doohan's been good too. He's been solid. He's gotten good results, especially at Spa. He saw that opportunity to close the gap and he took it. But Hauger's just been, that much better, and that's why he's in the lead. As for F2, I think Monza was probably the most exciting F2 weekend of the year, and I say that about every race in F2, but we had three really good races, and I really enjoyed that. Piastri has been improving at a really good rate as well. If you take his qualifying this season, his first race he qualified 7th, and then he qualified the next two race weekends, because it's by weekend. The next two race weekends he qualified in 3rd, and then the last two race weekends he's gotten pole position. So I think he's just getting comfortable in F2, and he's really just turning heads. Guan Yu Zhou's right up there too. I think the problem with Guan Yu Zhou's championship was Monaco. They weren't really up there, and then they went for a pit strategy, put the wrong tires up, and basically ended up 2 laps behind everyone else, and that cost him a lot of points. He's only currently, I think it's like less than 10 points, 15 points actually, behind Piastri. So he's got a lot of work to do if he wants to pass Piastri. I can't see it happening unless something happens to Piastri in a race. And I guess usually the easiest way in F2 for that to happen is to have a bad qualifying. That's kind of like a game changer. If you do bad on Friday, it lets everyone else catch up to you. So there's still a lot of race left in F2. In terms of IndyCar, we had Callum Isla tested with Juncos Hollinger, I believe is what they're called. They're a brand new team, so they just joined IndyCar on a full-time basis. They would compete the last few years in Indianapolis 500, but they just joined now as a full-time team. They gave Isla the seat till the end of a year. He had good testing. Unfortunately, in his first race, his qualifying wasn't great. He didn't finish the race. That was in Portland. But he's got 2 more opportunities. And next year, they're also going to have a full-time car for every single race. So we'll see what happens there. But in terms of the IndyCar Championship, Palou was able to win in Portland. Patricio Award, I think, finished in 11th or way down. So it was swapped again. So Palou is now leading the championship, but it's a good fight. Another good battle going on in IndyCar is Scott McLaughlin and Romain Grosjean for the Rookie of the Year fight. At this point, McLaughlin's got the advantage. Grosjean also did not finish that race, and McLaughlin finished, I believe, 9th in Portland, so that's a good haul of points. So he's leading that, and it's looking good for New Zealand racing fans, I guess.
All right. Yeah, my knowledge of that is dangerous. The only thing that I do know is if Piastri does win the F2 championship this year, he can't compete again in F2 next year, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. If you win the championship, you're kind of considered a graduate now. So it's a weird scenario because you want Piastri to do well, but then you're like, I'd like to see him in F2 another year, but if a rookie can end up winning F2 with that field, that's really impressive. And I would kind of gauge Piastri on the same level potentially as a guy like Lando Norris or even George Russell with their results in F2. I think Alpine will eventually find a seat for him. It might not be next year, but they'd be crazy to let a talent like that go.
It's a strange concept, and it is unfortunate because there are so many, drivers currently in F1 that are going to be there for a while. So these young F2 drivers, if they win the championships and they have nowhere to go, it's odd to consider. But yeah. All right, then on to our last segment, the Russian Grand Prix, our expectations. I think it's going to be much the same as Monza in the sense that Mercedes is going to dominate. Mercedes power is going to dominate. It's a very power-intensive circuit, and Mercedes just kind of kills it there. But who knows? We might see another circuit Paul Ricard. Red Bull might pull something out of the hat. So we'll have to see, but I think it's going to be a Mercedes front row. I think it's probably going to be a Mercedes on the podium, both of them, possibly with a McLaren or something else somewhere in between. But yeah, Peter, what do you think? What are you expecting from the Russian Grand Prix?
Look, I wouldn't venture too far away from what you've just predicted there, Henrico. I mean, I look back at the history of the races, from 2014 up until last year. Mercedes victories right across the board. I don't think anything will really change that. The one thing I'd be interested in seeing is actually is a weather forecast. I mean, I know historically the weather for this race weekend has been always well. It's been quite dry. Usually the climate where Sochi is located is usually quite dry. Yet it'd be nice just to have something to spice it up a bit. Throw in a rain shower or something like that just to mix it up. But look, I can't see anything really changing beyond that. Even if even if Max has got a new power plant in the back of that Red Bull, I still don't think that will actually change any difference to the running order unless something dramatically happened to Mercedes. But I couldn't see that happening. I think any Mercedes engine car, I think, is going to do very well at Russia.
And Martin, what's your take?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the Red Bull might take that engine penalty since they have already got a penalty from Monza, and I think that would put Max out of a race in terms of running for a podium position. Bottas won that race last year, if everyone remembers that Drive to Survive episode. I think Bottas is going to be good till the end of the year. I think he'll continue that. So I think it'd be Mercedes front row also. In terms of that last podium spot, it could be Perez. He qualified and finished in 4th last year in Racing Point. Or maybe Ricciardo can keep the role he's on. He qualified in 5th last year and finished in 5th. So, also not far off what you guys are saying.
And Steve, how far do you think Mazepin's going to be ahead of the rest of the field in Sochi?
Miles. If you've ever seen the size of a Typhoon nuclear attack submarine, I expect maybe at least 10 of those in relative length on track. Absolutely monstrous performance predicted by Mazepin. I mean, he's that good. He's 21st in a 20-car championship. It's fantastic. In all seriousness, though, I predict I'll probably be asleep by lap 10. I don't like Sochi. I never have. It's quite a dull circuit. It could be spicy, though. I mean, I'm a Barton. I think Red Bull will just rip the band-aid off and take the engine penalty here. It makes sense. It's really their last sort of. This is it's a definitive Mercedes track, like going off the history, and I mean, that's not going to change. It's also our last year of Sochi. I think next year we get the new St. Petersburg circuit.
That's 2023, I thought.
Oh, you might be right, actually. So in which case, normal service shall resume. But I can't really see it being a particularly favourable weekend for Red Bull, so I think they'll just sort out Max's engine penalty here. In terms of podium, Mercedes 1-2, it could end up either way. It could be Lewis first, Bottas second. Martin made a really good point before. I think Bottas has finally, now that the pressure of just having that 1 year or 1 season contract lingering over his head, and now that he's got a solid future as the number 1 driver at another team, which he can help develop, I think the gloves are off and he'll just go for it. Third, don't know. I mean, it could be Perez, but I just don't have a huge amount of confidence in him, or just him in that car. But I mean, I've made my reasons for that very clear earlier in the episode. It could be a McLaren. I mean, that could just be, rose tinted glasses following Monza, but they have shown that they are properly quick. And Sochi does have some straight bits that are kind of curved, but you can go fast on them. So, I mean, that's an element, I suppose. I'm just trying to find some excitement for Sochi, to be honest with you. But I mean, Mercedes 1-2, and whoever gets third, well done.
I think that's kind of going to be what everyone's expecting. That's probably what everyone's going to get. But who knows? We might end up with some surprises there. You never know. You're like in a small Russian town that's not allowed to fly the Russian flag at the race.
Imagine if it's another Paul Ricard and we absolutely get blown away with a really good race.
That would be phenomenal. That would really be cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's probably how it's going to go. I'm still excited to see the title fight this year. There's still enough in it for Red Bull to come good and take the Constructors' Championship. But the way I see this year panning out, I think Max is probably going to get Drivers' Championship, but I think Mercedes is still going to clinch Constructors because of that consistency with their second driver. But it's going to be interesting to see. I'm still looking forward to it. And as much as Sochi is about as exciting as watching paint dry, I'm still interested in seeing the outcome of the race.
There is one interesting scenario you mentioned. They're not allowed to fly the flag. If Robert Schwartzman ends up winning a race in F2, they will play the Russian anthem. So there is still a scenario. And the reason for that is because F2 isn't considered a worldwide series, I guess. So I just wanted to add that little bit of information.
And if Mazepin wins in the F1 race, what would they play then?
At that, I'm not sure. I don't even think they know yet because he's about to surprise everyone.
Okay. It's probably going to be what's the thing called? Tripalowski, that one. But anyway, that was a lot of interesting points, a lot of good discussion there. I enjoyed that. Anybody got anything else to add?
I was just going to add in really quickly the probably more relevant to our Australian and New Zealand members, but even for those that do want to watch the series abroad. So S5000 was meant to kick off around now. Unfortunately, due to the COVID restrictions, we've seen that push out to when we were meant to have our anticipated Bathurst International weekend at Mount Panorama at the end of November. So we've had some calendar changes, again, mainly driven because of COVID and border restrictions and whatnot. They've actually merged this with the Supercars organizing body to essentially have almost a week-long festival of motorsport at Mount Panorama the first weekend of December. So it's going to merge the ARG categories, which of course the S5000 is part of. So we're still fortunate enough to see the S5000 category make their debut at Mount Panorama. So we're definitely looking forward to that, and that's going to culminate with the Bathurst 1000 on the Sunday of that week. So keep an eye, wherever you are in the world, keep an eye on your broadcast schedules for those races. It would be great to see S5000 make a debut. There is rumored talk that Rubens Barrichello may make a reappearance. We were meant to see him at the Grand Prix at Australia back in 2020, which of course was cancelled. So look, if those rumors do come true, it'd be great to see him back. But of course, we're looking forward to seeing more than a dozen S5000s roaring around Mount Panorama in December.
One thing to add on to that as well is they're predicting well under sub 2 minute laps for S5000s at Mount Panorama as well. There's onboard footage of who was it? Braden Wilmington, I think.
Yes, former Shakedown member as well. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Hi, Braden, if you're listening. He did some demo laps, I think, in 2019, and you can quite clearly hear, because I don't think they posted any official lap times, but you can quite clearly hear that he's not giving it everything. Like there's plenty more that those cars can that those cars can put out. Bear in mind, this was just a demo lap, so they're not going to be on it all the time. So really keen to see what sort of lap time they can produce. I think I think fastest lap record is around a late 1:59, and that was Chris Mees in a de-restricted Audi R8 GT3. So I'm really looking forward to seeing just how quick these are. I'm going to say 1:56 just to be insane.
I'm going to try and make a point of watching that, because that track is quite something else. I wouldn't want to race it. It looks like a nightmare. So it should be good fun racing.
I've done it in a camper van on Tuesday morning after Bathurst, and that was scary enough.
But I think that's a good place to leave it. It's been a good chat, guys. Thanks so much for joining. And yeah, thank you to our audience for watching. We enjoy doing this very much. Going to try and make these episodes a little bit more regular in the future. Please, if you haven't already liked it, like our Facebook page, Formula Shakedown, and our sister pages, Shakedown Australia, Moto Shakedown, and there's
Shakedown
one more.
Sim Racing.
Shakedown Sim Racing. Please like them. Very nice community where we try and be wholesome and not mean to each other and not try and troll each other. And I think it's working so far, which is great to be a part of. And yeah, thanks to you guys, Steve, Martin, Peter. It's been great. And we'll do this again after the Sochi race. So thanks, and have a good night, morning, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.
See ya.